I didn't ask a lot of questions when I took the job. Just one of those listings that caught my eye at the right time. Night janitor needed for historical property restoration. I was between gigs and didn't feel like dealing with people. That was the hook. Midnight to 6 a.m., 3 days a week. No tourists, no coworkers, no one asking questions. Just me, a mop, and a crumbling courthouse the town had apparently decided was worth restoring. The place was about 10 miles outside city limits, wedged between 2 dead roads and a stand of trees that looked like they hadn't moved in 100 years. Old stone courthouse, 3 stories, peaked roof, arched windows coated in grime so thick they looked painted. The grass was overgrown, the pavement cracked and buckled, and the door creaked like a warning when I first stepped inside. Melvin was waiting for me in the lobby. Supervisor, middle-aged, awkward posture with one of those faces that never quite settled into one shape. He didn't shake my hand, just passed me a small badge on a lanyard and a key ring with tags scribbled in permanent marker. Alarms off between midnight and 6. Don't wander outside after it rearms. Your time clock's near the front. Keep logs if anything breaks. No trash removal yet, just dusting, mopping windows, sanitizers in the back closet. Don't use the bathrooms. I nodded and followed him as he showed me the layout. First and second floors were courtrooms and offices. Third floor had once held the judges' chambers and jury waiting areas, but that was off limits. So was the elevator, which still had an old inspection tag from the 90s hanging crooked behind greasy plexiglass. The stairwell to the basement was narrow and steep, lined with brown tile and worn brass railing. I remember how quiet it got the moment we stepped down there, like the whole building was holding its breath. The air was cooler, almost damp, but the lights still worked, barely. Melvin stopped halfway down the hall and pointed to a dark door at the end. All the other doors were standard off-white, cracked with age and water damage. This one was deep gray, almost black, with a metal placard that read B12. The numbers were scratched up, like someone had tried to gouge them out years ago. "Don't open B12, he said. I waited for the rest of the sentence, but that was it. He looked at me, then repeated it slower. Don't open B12, it's sealed, always has been. I asked if it was dangerous, something with asbestos maybe. He didn't answer, just turned around and headed back up the stairs like the conversation was over. The rest of the orientation was basic. Cleaning supplies were in a locked room near the back entrance. Lights worked on motion sensors in most rooms, though some flickered. Heat ran low but steady. If I needed to call someone, I was supposed to leave the building and use my cell outside. No signal inside. That didn't bother me. I wasn't here to talk to anyone. The first night I clocked in, I brought a thermos of coffee and a small radio that barely picked up 1 a.m. station. Static and talk shows mostly. I didn't need it for entertainment, just noise. Even with all the fluorescent lights overhead, the place felt dim. Not dark exactly, just dulled, like everything had lost its color and sound. I started on the first floor, offices and record rooms. Most had been stripped of anything important, just broken furniture, water-stained walls, and piles of paperwork yellowed into mush. I swept, dusted, and wiped without hurry. No clocks worked, so I kept checking my phone for time. Even that felt off, like minutes moved slower when I wasn't looking. The second floor had 2 large courtrooms, both in varying states of disrepair. One had collapsed ceiling tiles and bird droppings in the gallery. The other was oddly intact. Wooden benches, dusty but cleanable. The judge's podium stood like an altar at the far end, shadowed from above by half-dead lights. There was something about that room, the silence in it. Not peaceful silence, but weighted, like a silence that had shape. I worked fast in there, pushing the mop bucket across scuffed tile, trying not to look too long at the rows of benches. I didn't go near the third floor. After a few shifts, the routine settled. I kept to the same pattern, first floor, second floor, then the basement last. I avoided B12 without thinking about it. No one had to remind me. Something about the door made you instinctively move on. The rest of the basement was simple enough. Storage rooms full of cracked boxes, old janitorial supplies, and broken furniture. One room had racks of dusty legal books, their covers so brittle the titles flaked off when touched. The walls sweated when the temperature rose. The lights buzzed overhead in a way that sounded like faint whispers when I stopped moving. There was a cold spot that always lingered near B-12. Not just temperature, it felt like pressure. You could walk 10 feet in any direction and be fine, but the moment you passed the door, even just passing by, something settled on your shoulders. Not painful, just heavy. I didn't hear footsteps, no voices, no bangs or doors slamming, but the building felt aware of me in a way I couldn't explain, like it had grown used to silence and now resented the sound of my work boots and wheels. The fourth night, I noticed the light above B12 flicker when I approached. It wasn't much, just a half-second stutter, but it did it again when I passed it going the other way. I stopped, looked up, waited, nothing. When I turned my back, it buzzed softly. I told myself it was faulty wiring. Then I told myself not to think about it. I mopped faster and didn't look back. On the sixth night, the janitor's closet near the boiler room was missing its padlock. The door was open 2 inches, even though I'd left it closed the night before. Inside, all the rags I'd neatly folded were in a heap on the floor. A stack of mop heads was overturned. My extension pole was missing. I figured someone else had been down there, maybe Melvin, maybe a contractor, but nothing else was out of place. No footprints, no new keys on the ring. I locked the closet again. Double-checked the boiler room too. Same temperature, same faint hum of the ancient machinery. But when I stood still long enough, I noticed something strange about the sound. There was a kind of rhythm behind the hum, not music, not mechanical, breathing. Long and slow. Inhale, pause, exhale. It wasn't coming from the boiler. I backed out of the room and didn't go back in the rest of the night. From then on, I started cutting the basement part of the shift short. I'd sweep quickly, mop what I could, and get back upstairs before the lights acted up again. Even then, it wasn't just downstairs that felt off. The courthouse didn't seem abandoned anymore. It didn't seem empty. The dust was settling in new ways, like something had moved through it. Doors that I left cracked open were closed the next time I passed. Once, I found my cart already rolled into the hallway when I came back from using the restroom. The wheels weren't still spinning, but the handle was warm. I thought about quitting, not because I was scared, not exactly, just uneasy, like there was a question waiting for me that I didn't want to be asked, but I needed the job. And nothing had really happened, not until the end of the second week. That was the night I finished cleaning early, around 4:30. I had a little time left, so I figured I'd go inventory some of the supply closets, see what needed refilling before the weekend. I was halfway down the basement hall when I stopped. B-12 was still shut, but the floor in front of it was different. The dust, which had always been smooth and undisturbed, was broken now. 2 small smudges side by side like footprints that had been gently brushed away. The marks didn't lead up to the door. They stopped just short of it. No prints leading in, none leading out. Just those faint dents in the dust like someone had been standing there watching the door or... No, that wasn't right. The smudges weren't in front of the door. They were facing away from it, like something had been standing inside B-12, looking out. I backed away slow, not making a sound. I didn't touch the door, didn't say anything. I went back upstairs, clocked out early, and sat in my truck until the sun came up. I didn't call Melvin. I didn't file a report. I just sat there and watched the front doors, and I waited to see if they'd open. The next time I showed up, I didn't even try to pretend the building felt the same. The front doors groaned a little harder when I pushed them open, like the hinges had rusted further in just a day. My badge still scanned fine. The lights still kicked on one by one with that soft hum. But the air had shifted, not colder exactly, just heavier, stiller. I stood in the lobby for a long moment before clocking in, watching dust fall through the light like snow in a dead room. I told myself it was just nerves. That thing with the prints, probably my own tracks, or maybe Melvin had done a quick inspection and hadn't told me. But deep down I knew better. The prints had been facing the wrong way. I started on the second floor that night. Something about the basement didn't sit right, and I figured putting it off might help me ease back into the routine. The gallery was as empty as always, long wooden pews with warped backs and splinters waiting for careless hands. But the acoustics had changed. Where the room once echoed cleanly when I pushed the mop, now sound seemed to bend. My footsteps felt muffled, like I was walking on something soft. The far end of the room looked darker than usual, even with all the lights on. I kept cleaning, but the silence had that breathless edge again, like the room was watching me. And just before I left, I could have sworn one of the gallery benches had shifted, angled maybe 2 inches inward, facing the aisle. It might have been like that the whole time, but I couldn't remember. That uncertainty stuck in my head all the way down the stairwell. When I reached the basement level, I paused at the last step. The tile had always been off down there, warped and uneven in patches, but now it looked worse. Subtle, maybe, but the floor tilted toward the B-12 hallway in a way I hadn't noticed before. A slow grade, just enough to make the cart roll if I didn't lock the wheels. I reached out and touched the wall, cool, clammy, and started walking. That's when I felt the first cold spot. It was just past the maintenance closet, halfway to B-12, a sharp drop in temperature, like walking past an open fridge. The difference hit me mid-step, and I stopped, held my breath. The air felt thin, like it wasn't full enough. I waved a hand in front of me, not expecting anything, but I could almost feel it, a patch of air that didn't behave right. The kind that makes your skin think you're being watched. I kept moving, trying not to overthink it. Old buildings have drafts, maybe a vent issue. I kept my head down and pushed the cart forward, the bucket sloshing softly at my side. The smell came next. Not strong, not at first. Just a faint, damp stink. Mildew with something sharper under it, like rusted metal or wet coins. It got stronger the closer I got to B-12, enough that I reached up and covered my mouth with the inside of my elbow. I'd dealt with mold before, dead rats, even a decomposing raccoon behind a ceiling panel once. But this was different. This smell had edges. It felt like it was cutting into the air. I slowed as I passed the janitor's closet. The door was shut now, same as I had left it the night before, but I noticed something on the floor, just a faint line, like dust had been disturbed in a clean arc. It curved slightly, maybe the width of a boot, and vanished halfway across the tile. I followed it with my eyes until it ended, right in front of B-12. The door was shut. The placard still barely visible, but the smell was stronger there. I stood staring at it for a good 10 seconds before I realized something else was wrong. The light above the door wasn't flickering. It was too steady. All the other hallway bulbs buzzed, pulsed, or faded in and out. But this one was clean, bright, constant. The longer I stared at it, the more the hallway around me seemed to stretch. The distance from the janitor's closet to B-12 looked longer than it had yesterday. Just a few feet more, but enough to notice. Like the hallway had grown. I forced myself to turn around. My boots felt heavy on the floor, and the cart didn't want to roll right. I thought about calling Melvin again, not to report anything, just to hear another voice, but I didn't want to explain what I'd seen. I didn't have words that sounded sane. I finished cleaning and left the basement without touching B-12. The next night I got lazy, I'll admit that. I skipped the first and second floors completely and went straight downstairs to get the worst part out of the way. It was cold again, colder than before. My breath didn't fog, but I felt it, that chill that settles between your skin and your nerves. The mop handle felt colder in my hand, even though it had been sitting in a supply closet upstairs. The hallway was empty. Everything looked normal at first glance, but as I started sweeping, I noticed another mark in the dust. Not a footprint exactly, more like a scuff. A heel drag, faint and shallow, just enough to see the tile beneath. I followed it with my eyes. It curved around the corner from the far utility room and stopped again at B-12. That's when I heard it. A soft scrape far down the hall. The sound of a wooden chair leg dragging across tile, just once, short and slow. I froze, every muscle in my body locked up. The sound hadn't come from the room behind me, it came from ahead. From the corridor past B-12, where there were no other rooms, just a dead end. I didn't breathe, didn't blink, just listened, nothing. I pushed the cart slowly forward, letting the wheels make enough noise to cover my steps. The hallway didn't get darker, but it felt darker, narrower, like the ceiling had dropped a few inches and the floor had tilted more. I stopped outside the utility room and looked in. Empty, nothing moved. But when I turned back toward the janitor's closet, something caught my eye on the far wall, just behind me, at the end of the corridor. It was another smear in the dust, this one lower to the ground, like something had been dragged. 2 lines side by side, straight, clean. They didn't lead to B-12. They led from it, and they stopped dead halfway across the hall. I went back upstairs without finishing my shift, clocked out without wiping the mop head, sat in my truck again watching the courthouse windows like I was waiting for a light to come on. Nothing did. The night after that, I brought a level, one of those cheap bubble tools you buy at a hardware store. I'd convinced myself the floor was just warped, that the weird tilt I kept feeling was in my head. I took it to the basement, crouched halfway between the stairs and B-12, and placed it down. The bubble was off. Not just a little, almost all the way to the edge of the vial. The floor was slanted a good 3 or 4 degrees toward the sealed door. I measured again, farther up the hall, still off. Checked the far side, near the maintenance closet. Slightly better, but still tilted. I went back upstairs, did the same test on the first floor. Perfectly level. So why the hell was the basement sinking? That was the first night I couldn't shake the feeling something had shifted. Not metaphorically, not emotionally. The courthouse was physically changing, just a little at a time, like wood swelling after a rainstorm, like stone settling after something underneath it moved. I checked the blueprints Melvin had taped up in the closet near the back exit. B-12 wasn't even labeled, just a room-sized void in the corner of the basement. No notations, no measurements. Every other room had dimensions, but not that one. I went home that morning and didn't sleep. Instead, I laid on my mattress and tried to remember exactly what the floor had looked like the first night I walked the basement hallway. Was the slope always there? Had I missed it? Were the drag marks part of some cleanup I'd done and forgotten? And why was the light above B-12 the only one that didn't buzz anymore? Back at work the next night, I checked the hallway as soon as I arrived. Still slanted, still too quiet, still cold near B-12. I kept my distance, focused on routine. Sweep, mop, sanitize. But halfway through the shift, I heard the chair again. Faint, just one long scrape somewhere past the door. And then 30 seconds later, 2 more, shorter, closer. I didn't check. I didn't move. I finished the shift upstairs, and every time I glanced at the stairwell door, I expected it to open. The courthouse wasn't empty anymore. I was sure of that. I just didn't know how long it had been waiting behind that sealed door, or how much longer it planned to stay. The smell was the first sign that something had changed. It hit me as I stepped off the last stair into the basement, sharp, like rust soaked in vinegar, with a chemical bite that clung to the back of my throat. My tongue tingled. I stopped at the base of the stairs and sniffed the air cautiously, half expecting it to fade like a passing whiff of mold, but it didn't. It hung there, thicker with each breath, like it was being pumped into the corridor one invisible thread at a time. I moved slowly, pushing my cart ahead of me. The light above B-12 glared brighter than the others, always too steady, too perfect. The tiles beneath it had changed. Even from halfway down the hall, I could see something dark spreading out in ragged trails, streaks that weren't there the night before. The floor felt sticky underfoot. At first I thought it was something I'd spilled, or maybe a busted bottle of floor wax leaking from the cart. But the bucket was sealed, the mop was dry, and the trail ahead was coming from the base of the sealed door. Thick blotches of a brownish-red fluid soaked into the grout lines, streaked with a coppery film that looked like it had been drying in layers over time. The smell got worse the closer I got. Less metallic now, more like rotting meat with a sharp chemical sting behind it, like raw organs left in bleach. My eyes started to water. I wiped them with the sleeve of my jacket and stepped up to the door, crouching low. There was a slow, steady drip coming from beneath it. Thick, brown. A drop fell every few seconds from the exact center of the door's underside, splashing into a shallow, irregular pool that had formed against the tile. I watched the surface tremble as each drop hit. It wasn't water. It had a density to it, like blood, but darker and more viscous, threaded with oily streaks that glinted under the light. It looked alive somehow, or at least not done moving. I stepped back and looked up at the door, still shut tight. The handle hadn't moved, the seal was still flush, but the fluid was seeping out all the same. I didn't touch it, didn't even think about cleaning it. Instead, I backed up until I reached the janitor's closet, unlocked it with shaking hands, and found the little laminated sheet of emergency numbers taped inside the door. No phone in the building, but Melvin's contact info was there at the bottom. I went outside. I had to. Once I hit the lost signal returned to my phone and I called him. The conversation was short. "There's something leaking out of B12, I said. "Thick, brown, smells like metal and meat. Might be a dead animal. Or worse." There was silence for a beat, and I thought maybe the call had dropped. "Could be a pipe," Melvin finally said, voice flat. "There's an old water main that runs under part of the basement. Probably rusted through. Happens in places like that." "I don't think this is water. Don't clean it," he said immediately, cutting me off. "Leave it. I'll get someone to check it out." "Check what out?" "The room's sealed. You said..." He hung up, just like that. I stared at the phone for a while before heading back in. The moment I stepped past the front doors, the smell returned, stronger now. The whole building carried it, a slow crawl through the air vents, a thickness in the lungs. Like whatever was leaking out of B12 wasn't content to stay in the basement anymore. I did a quick loop upstairs, wiped down a few windows, sanitized the stair rails, pretended I had a job that still made sense. But my ears kept catching the sound of distant dripping, even when I was 2 floors up. There was no dripping on the second floor, no leaks, no pipes overhead. Still it echoed. By the end of the shift, I was sure the smell had gotten into my clothes. My gloves stank of it, my jacket sleeves too. I stripped them off before getting in the truck and drove home with the windows down. I showered twice, scrubbed my hands until the skin went pink and raw. Didn't sleep much that day. The next night I brought latex gloves, a flashlight, and a small screwdriver. Not to open anything, but to pry up a floor tile if I needed to. I told myself I just wanted to be sure it was a plumbing issue. Melvin hadn't sent anyone, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. The basement was worse. The cold spot was wider now, easily stretching 5 or 6 feet in front of B-12. The tile was stained and sticky, but not with fresh liquid. Whatever had been leaking had dried to a thin, waxy layer, brown like dried blood, but with a faint green shimmer when the flashlight hit it. I knelt and scraped at the floor with the flathead screwdriver. The crust flaked up like dried glue. Beneath it, the tile had gone porous, almost soft, like whatever seeped through the door had eaten into the grout, chemically or otherwise. I pried gently at one of the looser tiles and lifted it. What was underneath wasn't pipe. It was dirt, black, fine, and dry as bone. No sign of any water line, no concrete pour, no PVC. Just dirt. I checked 2 more tiles, same thing. Then I looked closer at the dirt. It was moving, not a lot, just a slight pulsing. A twitch here, a ripple there, like air was being pushed up through it in tiny irregular bursts. I didn't stick my hand in. I didn't even touch it. I just stared, flashlight aimed dead center, watching as some pocket of invisible gas made the ground shiver like skin. I lowered the tile back into place, backed away, closed the janitor's closet, went upstairs. I didn't return to the basement for the rest of the night. The smell was in the vents now, following me up to the courtrooms, slipping through door gaps and light fixtures. I cleaned with the windows cracked, but the air never cleared. At one point, while rinsing out a bucket near the stairwell, I saw a bubble of that same dark fluid creeping across the upper landing. It vanished a moment later, sucked into the grout line like it had never existed. I checked my gloves, nothing, but my boots left faint brown prints when I walked under the second-floor lights. By the time I left that morning, the stink had soaked into the building. I could taste it at the back of my teeth. When I pulled off my shirt at home, the collar left a rust-colored smudge across the base of my neck. I threw the whole uniform in the garbage and made a note to bring a spare. Melvin didn't answer my follow-up calls, didn't respond to my texts either. The time clock still worked, the lights still turned on, and my badge still let me through the door. But I never saw another living person after that. The next 2 shifts were spent upstairs. I didn't touch the basement. I didn't even open the stairwell door. But that didn't stop the courthouse from reminding me it was still leaking. Tiny puddles would form near the front lobby overnight, gone by morning, with a faint, oily ring left behind. The carpet runners would curl and stain without warning. Once in the break room, I found a trail of smudged droplets leading across the tile to the sink. When I turned the faucet, a burst of warm air hissed out instead of water. No fluid, no pressure, just breath. On the 7th night, I gave in and went back downstairs. Something had changed. The floor was slanted even more now, noticeable without the level. My cart rolled on its own toward B-12 if I let go of it. The air was humid, stale. The light above the sealed door was no longer bright and steady. It pulsed slowly like a heartbeat, dimming and rising in rhythm. The fluid wasn't dripping anymore. It was weeping. Slow rivulets of brownish sludge trickled from the base of the door in thin, squirming lines. They moved like veins across the tile, merging with old stains and tracing new paths along the grout. I watched one of them change direction midstream, curving toward the opposite wall like it had changed its mind. I stood there far too long. At some point I became aware of a sound, faint, regular. Tick, tick, not dripping, tapping, from the other side of the door, just once every 5 seconds or so. I didn't wait to see if it continued. I climbed the stairs, locked the janitor's closet, and finished the rest of my shift sitting in the back room with the lights on full. I didn't clean, I didn't mop. I just sat with my flashlight and stared at the door, waiting for it to open even though I knew it wouldn't. Not yet. The next day, I came in early. Not by much, maybe 20 minutes, but enough to poke around a bit before the shift officially started. The air outside the courthouse felt thicker than usual, like the pressure was wrong, and I had this itching need to look through something, anything, that might explain what the hell was happening. I remembered a side room near the back entrance, behind a warped utility door labeled Mate. Records. I'd never really explored it. The lock didn't work properly, and the inside always smelled like mildew and rotted cardboard. But that night, it felt like the right place to look. The room was worse than I remembered. Sagging shelves lined the walls, some cracked under the weight of old boxes. Everything was damp to the touch. Documents warped from moisture. File folders stuck together, labels blurred into brown ink blots. My gloves squished when I picked anything up. There were cans of paint so old the labels had curled off, rusted tools in buckets of evaporated grime, boxes marked janitorial, 1960s in evidence hold, do not remove. I started going through the oldest shelves. Most of it was useless. Logs of light bulb changes, carpet replacements, broken door hinges. But behind a stack of broken clock parts, I found a thick binder wrapped in wax paper, coated in a blanket of undisturbed dust. It wasn't labeled, just a gray cloth cover, stained dark at the edges. When I opened it, the pages inside groaned like old floorboards. The paper was brittle, yellowed, but the writing, done in pencil and blue ink, was still legible. It was a room usage ledger. Columns labeled date, room, name, purpose, and notes, all handwritten in tight, uneven lines. Most of the entries were mundane: meeting notes, cleaning schedules, repair calls, electrical, Jenkins, RM-3, fixed ceiling light, carpet stretch, second floor hall, Judge Swain, RM-204, private meeting. But about 30 pages in, a different pattern emerged. Room B-12. It appeared once in 1958, then again in 1960, then a cluster of entries in 1963, all with the same handwriting. Each time the name column read something different: Baker, Torres, G. Swain, but the handwriting didn't change. One pen, one person. Then, in a bolder stroke near the bottom of the page, B12, condemned 1965. Unauthorized use ceased. The word condemned was underlined twice. Unauthorized use was scratched over with a graphite smear, but still visible beneath it. The handwriting on that entry looked more agitated, slanted, rushed, like it had been written while standing up or glancing over a shoulder. Nothing else was written for a while. The pages that followed returned to normal entries for other rooms. More notes about plumbing, carpet, and busted thermostats. Decades passed in silence. Then B12 started appearing again. Not in the official columns, just scrawled in the margins. Sloppy, narrow writing repeated over and over. Don't open it. Still leaking. Lights wrong again. Not maintenance. Not water. I flipped ahead, slowly now. Each page looked the same. Normal entries, casual updates, and somewhere along the edge or tucked under a tape seam, another note. Sometimes all it said was a date and B12 in red pencil. Other times, heard them again. It dripped from the light fixture today. No one logged this, but someone entered. That last one made me stop. I ran my gloved finger along the jagged writing. It was near the bottom of a page from 1989. Underlined twice. The note trailed off, like the pencil had snapped mid-sentence. I flipped further. There were fewer entries now. The handwriting had deteriorated. Same hand, but shakier, more erratic. Then near the very back, on a water-stained page barely holding together, I found the last real entry. B-12 entered. Door jammed from inside. Don't clean. That was all it said. No date, no name, just that. I stared at it for a long time. The handwriting was almost illegible, lines jittering across the page, pencils smeared by sweat or shaking fingers. But it was the same scrawl that had marked all the margin notes for years. Whoever had been writing about B12, obsessing over it for decades, had finally gone in, and they hadn't come back out. I stood there in that little maintenance room for what must have been half an hour, just holding that page, trying to steady my breathing. The walls felt closer than before. The shelves leaned just a little more inward. I could hear the hum of the building again, low and constant, vibrating through the soles of my boots. When I finally closed the binder, I wrapped it back in its wax paper and tucked it under my arm. I didn't want to leave it behind. Didn't want to let it go. It felt like the only proof that something inside the building had changed, that I hadn't imagined the smell, or the cold spot, or the fluid that pulsed and spread and vanished into the tile. I carried the ledger with me to the second floor and sat in one of the courtroom benches. I flipped back through it under the overhead lights, studying the entries, checking dates, comparing names. That's when I noticed something else. The name that appeared in the earliest B12 entries, Baker, was the same one scribbled in the corner of a file I'd seen during my first week in the records room. It had been on a cracked file folder, no label on the tab, just a brown smudge of ink across the front and a typed note paper clipped to the inside. I hadn't thought much of it at the time. I went back down to the basement that night, against every instinct I had. Not to the door, not to B-12 itself, but to the archives room 3 doors down, where the file had been left out on a desk too short for adult use. The air was thick with that same mildew-stained coppery tang, but I powered through it. I found the file within minutes, same cover, still damp at the edges. Inside were 3 pages, barely legible, a transcript, no header, no seal, just a conversation. Did you hear it again? It never stopped. And you still want to go in? I've been invited. Then silence. That last line hadn't been underlined, but the graphite pressure on the word invited had nearly torn the page. The name at the bottom, Baker. I didn't take the file with me. I left it exactly where I found it and went back upstairs, numb to the temperature now, numb to the smell. I sat in the break room, next to the vending machine that had never worked, and opened the ledger again. Someone had gone into B12. The door had jammed from the inside, and no one had ever come to get them. What disturbed me wasn't that it happened. What disturbed me was how it had been accepted. Not removed, not reported, not even covered up. Just logged, like any other broken door or flickering bulb. The courthouse had absorbed it the same way it absorbed everything else, without fuss, without drama, quietly, permanently. I finished my shift upstairs, keeping to the corners, ignoring the stains near the baseboards, pretending I didn't see the oily spots that appeared and disappeared on the stair railings. I didn't go near the basement for the rest of the night. When I got home, I looked up the name. There were a few listings for Gerald Baker, a local contractor, a maintenance lead from the 60s, even a newspaper mention about service commendations for years of dedication. No obituary, no retirement notice, no final record of him ever leaving the courthouse. I didn't sleep. The next night I brought the ledger back with me. I wasn't sure why, maybe guilt for taking it, or fear that it wouldn't be there if I left it too long. I placed it on the desk in the second-floor gallery, under the same flickering light as always, and tried to go back to normal. But normal didn't exist anymore. Not when the building itself had a history that couldn't be cross-referenced. Not when a man had entered a sealed room voluntarily and was never seen again. And not when I now understood that the door was never meant to be opened or watched. It was meant to be fed. That thought stayed with me long after I had left the courthouse. I took the next 2 nights off, told Melvin I was sick, left it vague. He didn't ask questions, didn't sound surprised. He just said to take what I needed, and I hung up wondering how many others had made the same call. The smell didn't leave with me. It lingered behind my teeth in the corners of my apartment, on the inside of my nose like something absorbed into the tissue. I woke both nights at 3 a.m. sharp. No dreams, just awake and listening. The second night, I swore I heard a faint creak outside my bedroom door, like someone slowly shifting their weight on rotted boards. But I lived alone, on the 3rd floor, no hallway boards, no one else. I didn't check. On the 3rd night, I went back. I told myself I wasn't going near the basement, just upstairs, just the normal rounds. But the moment I stepped inside, I felt it, the pull, like the air had weight and slope again. A gentle tug toward the stairwell. My legs ached just from standing still, like gravity was off kilter by degrees. The lights buzzed as usual, but the tone had changed. A little lower, a little slower, like a throat clearing itself behind the walls. I swept the 2nd floor with automatic movements, not really seeing what I was doing. At some point, I found myself standing at the top of the basement stairwell without remembering how I got there. The metal door stood slightly ajar. I hadn't opened it, I was sure of that. I'd always left it shut behind me. I stared down into the dark. The light at the bottom clicked on. Not flickered, clicked, solid, deliberate. I descended slowly, one hand tight on the rail. The smell was weaker now, not gone, just thinned. burnt copper and stagnant water clinging to the edges of the air like mold behind wallpaper. Halfway down, I stopped. The hallway below was quiet. The light above B-12 was on, and the door was open. Not wide, just a few inches. Enough to see a sliver of the floor beyond it. I stepped down slowly. Each tread felt softer than the last, like the stairs had absorbed moisture and were sagging beneath my boots. My flashlight stayed off. I didn't want to add to the light already waiting. When I reached the bottom, the first thing I noticed was the floor. It was clean, not recently cleaned, perfectly clean. No dust, no grime, no streaks or water damage. The tile inside the room was a shade lighter than the rest of the basement, like it had been preserved or replaced. I moved closer, just enough to lean my head past the door frame and look in. The room was a courtroom, small but unmistakable. Rows of wooden chairs lined either side, perfectly aligned. A short central aisle led to a simple judge's bench, wider than the others in the upstairs courtrooms. Everything was polished. The railing gleamed. The banisters glowed with old varnish. There wasn't a speck of dust anywhere, not on the chairs, not on the bench, not even in the corners. I stayed outside the threshold. The air changed at that invisible line, warmer inside, faintly humid. My ears popped slightly just from leaning forward. I reached for the flashlight but didn't turn it on. There was already light inside the room, not from fixtures. There were no visible bulbs, but a soft, ambient glow that cast no shadows. It was then I saw the hand. At first I thought it was a trick of the wood, some warped carving in the judge's bench, but the longer I stared, the more the shape defined itself. A hand, pale, thin, resting gently on the back edge of the judge's platform. Fingers curled over the top, skin the color of old wax, nails long but dull, motionless, bent wrong. The wrists sat at an angle no joint should hold, like the bones had turned sideways inside the skin. There was no arm, no shoulder, no face, just the hand, rising from behind the bench, frozen in that delicate, almost relaxed pose. I didn't move, didn't blink. I just stared, trying to decide if it had been there the whole time or if it had only just risen. It didn't twitch, didn't flex, but I knew it wasn't lifeless. There was tension in it, just beneath the surface, a readiness. I stepped back. My boots struck something soft. I turned, nothing there. The hallway was still empty, but I had the distinct sensation of having nudged a bag of wet rags, something with give, but the tile was clear. I looked back at the room. The hand was gone. The bench sat empty. The glow inside the room dimmed slightly. I turned and walked away without another glance, making sure my footsteps were slow even. No running, no panic. I didn't check behind me until I was back at the top of the stairs. The door was still open, just a crack, waiting. I spent the rest of the shift in the break room. Lights on, door locked, radio playing static just loud enough to fill the corners. The next night the door was shut again, completely. No sign of the hand, no trace of light. The floor in front of it was spotless. The tile had been scrubbed. Even the grout was clean. I didn't do it. No one else was supposed to be there. I started finding new signs that week. A small trash bin near the second floor elevator had been emptied. I hadn't done that. I hadn't even mopped that side of the building in days. The hallway near the old file cabinets smelled like lemon cleaner. A chair that had been collecting dust since my first shift now sat at a cleaner angle, like someone had moved it, then corrected themselves. None of it was dramatic, just little adjustments, but that's what made it worse. It wasn't trying to hide, it was trying to work. Something was cleaning, someone, somewhere inside the building. And they weren't finished. I started noticing it the next night. Little things first. Harmless, almost. A rag that I was sure I left on the second floor and now draped neatly over the handle of the janitor's closet in the basement. A pair of gloves I'd stuffed in my back pocket ended up hanging on a pipe near the records room. My bucket, which I'd emptied and stacked upside down, was now upright. And full. Brimmed with water I hadn't poured. Not clean water either. It had a faint reddish hue, just enough to catch the light wrong. I dipped a gloved finger in and rubbed it against my palm. Slick, a little oily, no smell. But when I turned away to grab a test strip from the supply drawer and looked back, the water level was lower. I dumped the whole thing down the janitor's sink, watched it spiral away with a long, sluggish drain. The pipes groaned. Something caught in the trap and rattled, but I didn't look. I checked the hallway. The door to B-12 was closed, just as it had been the night before, but my mop was leaning against it, perfectly upright, bristles dry. I hadn't used it yet. I walked over, lifted it gently, and looked around. The air near the door was warm again, stagnant. My shadow barely held together in the light, like it thinned as it touched the floor. I backed off, returned the mop to the cart, and wheeled it away, fast and silent. Upstairs, I wiped down what I could, but I was only going through the motions. I kept seeing that bucket, full, undisturbed, waiting. That water hadn't come from any tap in the courthouse. The next night, it happened again. I unlocked the janitor's closet and found the mop already missing. My cart was just where I left it, wheels locked, rags folded, but the mop wasn't there. I did a slow loop of the floor, nothing on the first, nothing on the second. When I got to the basement, the door to the boiler room creaked as I passed. Inside, the mop stood against the far wall, damp, leaning casually, bristles resting in a puddle that hadn't been there yesterday. I checked the closet again. The door I always latched now hung slightly ajar, one glove on the floor. My flashlight, which I always kept in the top tray, now tucked into the corner. Something was moving my tools. Not stealing, not destroying, just relocating, like it was trying to help or learn. I brought my own flashlight from home the following night, one I could trust. Then I brought a cheap motion camera, something I picked up from a big box store years ago, meant for garages or driveways, battery-powered, low-res. It recorded on a loop. I mounted it just outside the B-12 hallway with a clear view of the door and surrounding tiles, right above the spot where the fluids had leaked weeks before. It felt stupid doing it, like I was stepping over some invisible line I'd carefully avoided, but I needed to know. That night was quiet, almost too quiet. The light above B-12 didn't flicker, the hallway stayed level. I swept, mopped, sanitized, and made it through the shift without finding a single thing out of place. The next morning, I took the memory card home and played the footage on my laptop. It showed the hallway clearly, static frame, wide angle, low light capture. My own shape entered the frame around 1 a.m., mopping, pausing at the closet, adjusting the cart. I left frame, came back later, rechecked the mop. Nothing strange. Until 3:12 a.m., the lights dimmed, the footage flickered once, barely noticeable, but when I advanced it frame by frame, I saw it. A single frame skipped, just one, and when it resumed, the mop was leaning against the wall now, not where I left it, just a few feet closer to the door. Then another flicker. The bucket moved. No visible hand, no motion, just a skip, from empty to half full, then gone again. Each time the footage dropped 2 or 3 seconds, sometimes 4, enough to erase movement, not enough to trigger motion detection. I scrolled through the entire 6-hour file. No person ever entered the frame, no shadows, no tampering, just subtle shifts, things changing position as if by breath, by thought, by waiting long enough for your eyes to dry out and miss it. I installed a second camera the next night, different angle, focus tighter on the door itself. I worked my shift with unease coiled up behind my ribs like a knotted rope. I didn't hear anything that night, no scraping chairs, no breathing vents, but I felt it, like I was being watched by someone who didn't need to move to see. When I got home, I played the second camera's footage. Nothing for hours. Then, just before 4 a.m., both feeds cut out simultaneously. Not black screen, static. 5 full seconds of it. Then the feeds returned. The lights in the hallway were off. The glow inside B-12, if that's what it was, cast a faint line of illumination across the threshold. Not enough to see inside, just enough to see what had changed. There was a wet trail across the floor, 2 lines, parallel, thin, as if something had been dragged out and then back in. The trail darkened where it pooled beneath the camera. I watched that puddle form in 2 skipped frames. First dry tile, then moisture, then back to dry again, as if it had been cleaned. Cleaned, not vanished, wiped. The cameras didn't lose power. I checked the battery logs, no interruption. But the footage skipped all the same, like the camera had obeyed something it didn't understand. I stopped watching after that, left the footage on my desktop and didn't open it again. The next time I came in, I left the cameras unarmed. It didn't feel like surveillance anymore. It felt like permission. Like whatever was in B-12 had let me see enough. Like it wanted me to know the limits of what it allowed. When I entered the basement, the hallway smelled like bleach. Not faintly, overwhelmingly, soaked into the air, into the floor, into the light itself. The kind of sterile chemical burn that clings to hospital walls after something's been scrubbed too hard and too late. The floor in front of B-12 was damp. I knelt and touched the tile. It was warm, not from ambient heat, from use. The janitor's closet door hung open behind me. Inside, my supplies were rearranged, mops in order of size, bottles rotated so the labels faced out, rags sorted by color. The red ones were gone. I never used red rags. I never brought red rags. I stood still for a long time. Then I shut the closet, locked it, and left the basement for the rest of the night. I worked the first and second floors in silence. But the entire time, I kept hearing the faintest sound behind me, just 1 room away, like a bottle being set gently on tile, like a mop wringing out water without a hand. Not frantic, not rushed, just steady. Someone was helping me clean. That thought stayed with me longer than it should have, long enough to become routine. Every time I opened the janitor's closet now, the supplies were freshly organized. Mop heads lined in pairs, spray bottles cleaned. The brushes I'd forgotten to rinse now stood neatly bristled and dry. I stopped asking why, stopped wondering how. And then the floor started to move. It began as a ripple, subtle at first, barely a curve in the tile just beyond B-12. I thought it was a trick of the light. But the warp remained the next night, more pronounced, like the grout had started to swell beneath the surface. 1 tile had cracked straight across, splitting diagonally as if something underneath had risen gently and held its breath. The edge of the hallway, where the baseboard met the wall, began to lean, just slightly, enough that the mop refused to stay upright unless I leaned it at a specific angle. The floor was bending. I knelt down to check the seam, running a gloved hand across the tile. It had risen by maybe half an inch, not soft, not wet, but shifted, like something underneath was displacing the structure, pushing the entire corridor up with patient insistence. That same night I noticed the door frame. It was wider, not dramatically, not enough to measure, but I knew. The gap between the door and the wall had grown, the seams had shifted, the metal around the hinges bowed outward like pressure had been applied from inside. The door itself looked untouched, still closed, still solid, but the world around it had started to pull away. I checked the tile again 2 nights later. It had grown worse. Now the crack ran the full width of the hall, a jagged seam that split the floor under B-12 and snaked halfway toward the janitor's closet like a bolt of lightning buried in porcelain. The grout around it had blackened, like something thick had leaked upward and dried in fractal veins. I crouched and peeled a flake of it loose. It broke apart between my fingers, brittle like burned paper. It left behind a fine soot on my gloves, dark, sticky, and warm. There was no reason for it to be warm. I looked up. The light above B-12 flickered. For the first time in weeks, not in a rhythmic stutter, just once, off, then on again, like a blink. The hallway was silent, but I heard something then. Not a sound exactly. A movement, Far down the corridor, where the shadows deepened and the floor curved ever so slightly into the dark, I saw it, just at the edge of light, a smear. Black debris trailing in two long, interrupted lines. Not footprints, not drag marks, something lower, smaller. A trail made by a body pressed flat to the ground, pulled forward by arms or elbows or something with weight. The trail stopped halfway down the hall and vanished beneath the buckled tile. Like whatever had crawled out had returned, or burrowed deeper. I backed up slowly. The floor flexed under my boots, not much, just enough to feel it, like the tile breathed underfoot. When I reached the stairwell, a gust of air blew up from below. I froze. There were no open windows in the basement, no ventilation system that strong. The breeze wasn't cold, but it wasn't warm either, just fast. A rushing push of air that swept through the stairwell and coiled around my legs like rising steam. I climbed the steps two at a time. At the top, the door slammed shut behind me. I hadn't touched it. I stood in the hallway, breathing hard, chest tight, waiting to hear footsteps following me up. But nothing came. Just the building, groaning softly to itself. The next night, I brought duct tape. I laid a strip across the bottom of the basement stairwell door and another just past the threshold to the B-12 corridor. I marked the ends with pens so I'd know if anything shifted them. Then I went about the rest of the night. The first and second floors were no better. The light stuttered when I moved. The windows, long sealed with grime and dust, began to show faint streaks on the inside, as if something had pressed against the glass. I swept the upstairs gallery with my head down. The benches had rearranged again. An aisle now ran slightly off-center. Two chairs stacked neatly in the corner where there had been none the day before. And then I found the baseboards. I was crouched with a brush, scraping old wax from the cracks when I heard it, breathing, not mine, deep, slow, coming from the wall, not through a vent, not overhead, from directly inside the baseboard, a space that shouldn't exist. I pressed my ear to the wall. The breathing stopped. When I leaned back, it returned. Inhale, hold, exhale. No rattling, no wheeze. Just air moving through unseen lungs, steady and deliberate. I stood and walked away without finishing. At the end of my shift, I returned to the stairwell and checked the tape. The strip on the stairwell door was untouched, but the one at the edge of the B-12 hallway, torn. The pen marks were off by 2 inches. Something had lifted the tape, crossed it, and laid it back down with the precision of someone who knew exactly what I was watching for. I went home without changing. I stripped at the door, dropped my gloves and jacket outside, and didn't bring anything in. I stood in the shower until the hot water ran cold. The following shift, I arrived to find the tile in front of B-12 had caved slightly. A shallow dip, maybe an inch lower than the surrounding floor. The crack now yawned wide enough to see into. The dirt below had shifted. It wasn't loose anymore. It had hardened into a web of black, root-like veins, thin tendrils of dried material that ran in branching spirals from some unseen point directly beneath the door. The door frame was bent. I hadn't imagined it. The hinges had bowed outward. Hairline fractures ran up the frame like spider legs. The light fixture above it flickered more frequently now, in pulses that followed no rhythm. I didn't go near it. I turned and walked the other direction, only to stop halfway down the hall, because I heard breathing again, but not behind a wall this time. Not above the ceiling, below me. I crouched near the baseboard, brush in hand, and froze. The breath came slow, deliberate, measured, like something resting directly beneath the tile. And it was moving. The breath shifted position as I crouched, following me, tracking me. I stood fast, back toward the stairwell, and only stopped when I saw the light from the camera I'd installed above the corridor flicker, then go dark. I didn't wait for it to come back on. I locked the closet, clocked out early, didn't speak, didn't look back. Something had crawled out. I didn't know when. I didn't know how. But I knew this. It hadn't left. It was still in the building. and it had started to learn the layout. I avoided the basement the next night, told myself I'd check the upstairs archives instead, just something to keep my hands busy while I thought. The memory of that thing breathing beneath the tile stayed with me like a bruise you couldn't see, just felt when you moved the wrong way. I headed to the second-floor storage room, where old municipal files had been dumped in bulk. Boxes stacked to the ceiling, half-collapsed shelves, reports with rusted paper clips. The air was dry up there, still dusty but not hostile. It didn't hum like the basement did. The silence wasn't thick. I started pulling boxes apart one by one, not looking for anything in particular, just hoping for a clue. Some kind of record that could tell me what this place used to be before they decided to slap a historical plaque on it and pretend it was safe to open. Most of it was junk. Tax assessments, sewer line maps, committee minutes. Then I found a heavy container marked janitorial, legacy files. No dates, no stamps. Inside, tucked beneath stacks of handwritten rosters and supply orders, was a thick brown binder with cracked edges and no cover label. The inside smelled like dry mold and pencil shavings. It wasn't a work schedule or inventory list. It was a logbook. Each entry had a name, a date, and a short note, some in cursive, some in block print, a few barely legible. The handwriting changed constantly, dozens of different hands, all janitors. The earliest entry I found was from 1963, requesting reassignment. Won't work basement shift again. Room B-12 made noise all night. M. Hart. Next page. Doors don't stay shut. Tools missing. Smells worse than before. R. Cruz, 1969. Page after page. Same themes. Requests for transfers. Basement complaints. Vague allusions to movement behind sealed doors. Some were matter of fact. Rolled my cart past B-12. Something tapped once from inside. Not going back alone. 1973. Others were abrupt. Heard it breathe. 1978. Don't clean there. 1981. Saw it in B12. 1984. That one chilled me. There were no elaborations. Just those 5 words. Like writing more would invite it. Another from 1989. Heard the roll call again. Different names this time. Roll call. I didn't know what that meant. A courtroom thing? Like for trials? I flipped back through the previous pages and saw the phrase repeated again and again. Never explained, never questioned. Heard the roll call. Roll call started early this time. Too many names. My name wasn't on the list. Then it was. After that, the handwriting became erratic. There was an entire page filled with one sentence repeated over and over in shaky scrawl. Don't answer when they call. I turned the page carefully, the paper fragile beneath my gloves. Toward the back, the entries grew less formal. Dates were missing, names abbreviated, just raw panic notes. Something came out. I thought I was helping. It wasn't. Still cleaning, still waiting. One entry was scrawled so hard it had torn through the paper. It only moves when you're not watching. I closed the book and sat back on the floor. No one had ever addressed any of it. No memos, no formal acknowledgments, just a log of people quietly trying to get out, like they were expected to encounter it, like it was a known part of the job. I checked the first few pages again, trying to see if there was an origin point, a moment when it started, but the first references were already written in shorthand, as if the earlier janitors had seen it too, and didn't feel the need to explain. That's when I saw the initials. On the inside cover, nearly faded out from age and water damage, a line of tiny cursive. Copy of Baker's original. Keep upstairs. Baker again. The same name from the transcript. The same man who entered B12 willingly. The same one who'd been writing in the first ledger for years. This wasn't the only book. This was the other logbook. A backup. A second version, hidden in the mess of municipal files instead of the janitor's closet. Probably kept in case the original disappeared. Or was taken. I held it for a long time, weighing it in my hands. This was proof. proof that I wasn't losing it, that whatever was down there had been seen, heard, feared for decades. And yet the courthouse stayed open. Tours were still scheduled. Volunteers were still coming in, polishing benches and setting up velvet ropes to corral guests through the upstairs chambers, while the foundation beneath them warped and flexed like a sore tooth ready to crack. I wanted to leave, right then, but I didn't. I closed the binder and placed it back in the box exactly as I found it. I didn't take it home this time. I didn't want it following me out. That night, I didn't touch the basement, but I could feel it in the floors. The hallway tile creaked in waves, the air vents hissed in a new pattern. I stood in the center of the courtroom on the second floor and listened, not to sound, but to wait. The kind of pressure you feel when someone steps onto a floorboard behind you, even when there's no one there. At 3:17 a.m., the building exhaled. Every door shifted on its hinges. Every bulb flickered once, and from somewhere deep below, I heard the unmistakable scrape of wood dragging across tile. A bench, a chair, a gurney. I stood in the break room with the door locked, clutching the little maintenance radio like it could transmit silence loud enough to keep the thing at bay. I knew now what was happening, not in detail, not in structure, but in rhythm. This was a cycle. Every few years it reached someone, pulled them in, taught them to clean, to obey, to answer, and when it had what it wanted, it folded the building back into place, left the ledgers behind, waited for the next one to clock in. I thought of the chair scraping, the names in the ledger, the water in the bucket I never filled. And then I thought of Baker's last line. I've been invited, the invitation hadn't come yet, but I was starting to hear the questions, and I was afraid I'd know the answers. The nights that followed passed in pieces. I stopped keeping track of which shift I was on. Time bent strangely in the courthouse now. I'd enter just after midnight and find the windows still dark at 6 a.m. I'd clean a hallway and come back to find it shorter or longer. Chairs moved when I blinked. Mop heads dried faster than they should. The cameras were gone. Both. No trace, no wires, no mounting screws, just clean walls and one small circular stain on the tile where the tripod had stood. Not scrubbed, absorbed. I didn't ask Melvin. I didn't tell anyone. One night, I think it was a Friday, I came in early. Habit, not out of courage. The lights were already on. All of them. Basement included. I knew something was wrong the moment I stepped onto the lower stairs. The air wasn't cold anymore. It was warm, still, not humid like before, occupied. Like the breath of the building had been held for too long and was now quietly exhaled through every wall, floor, and door frame. Halfway down, I smelled the bleach again, but this time it was dry, old, that sterile rot you get in hospital wings long after everyone's left. Underneath it was something new, soot maybe, ash and iron, like burnt paper soaked in rust. I reached the bottom step and froze. The door to B-12 was wide open. No flickering lights, no eerie glow. Just open. The inside was perfectly lit. Not harsh, ambient, indirect. Every inch of the small courtroom was visible. But it was wrong. All the chairs had been turned. Every single one faced the entrance. Not in neat rows now, but at angles. Some cocked sideways, some fully twisted around, like they had been startled mid-turn, frozen in a state of slow reaction. Even the judge's bench had changed. The chair behind it was gone. In its place sat nothing but the smooth, polished wood and two small indentations where elbows might have rested. The witness box had a clipboard, my clipboard, the one I thought I lost 3 shifts ago. On the floor, just beyond the threshold, was a human-shaped stain. Dark, dry, outlined as if someone had laid there for hours, days maybe, and then simply vanished. The arms were positioned at the sides, legs together, no sign of struggle. Just a presence pressed into the tile like water damage in flesh. I didn't cross the threshold. I didn't want to know what was still warm. Something moved in the corner of my vision. I looked up. In the jury box, something sat, still, motionless, partially shadowed. I couldn't make out its shape, not fully. It was slumped forward, hands on its knees or maybe folded in its lap. Its form was black against black, outlined only by the places light refused to touch. It didn't breathe, it didn't blink, but I felt it watching, not looking, watching, deliberate, present. My mouth was dry. I took one step back, then another. The hallway behind me stretched open, felt wider than it had any right to be. I turned my head slightly to glance back. That's when I heard it, my name, soft, just once, not a shout, not even a whisper really. It didn't come from the courtroom, it came from behind me, from the hallway I'd just walked down, the same hallway I knew was empty. I didn't turn fully, just enough to catch a shadow at the edge of the far corner. It slipped out of view as soon as I saw it. No shape, no movement, just gone. Then my name again, closer. The voice was my own, not in tone, not in pitch, but in cadence. The way I said it to others when confirming my name over the phone or signing in at the clinic. Like someone repeating it after hearing it too many times. I turned toward the open door to B-12. The stain was still there. The figure in the jury box hadn't moved. The chairs still faced me, but the room was breathing now. I could hear it, not loud, not constant, just soft pulls of air through an unseen throat. Not mechanical, not from the vents. Inhale, pause, exhale. I stepped back again. The lights in the hallway dimmed, not all at once, in sequence, one by one from the far end to where I stood. As if something were walking slowly toward me, darkening the path in its wake. The figure in the jury box tilted its head, not a lot, just a few degrees. Enough. I turned and walked, not fast, not slow, just steady. I didn't run. I didn't slam the stairwell door behind me, but I didn't stop moving until I was standing in the break room, the lights on full, the vending machine humming like nothing outside that room had ever existed. I stayed there until dawn. When I returned to the hallway at the end of my shift, the door to B-12 was shut again, completely, no gap, no sign of motion. But my mop was leaning gently against it, bristles damp. The cart stood beside it, perfectly stocked. I hadn't touched either. I walked back upstairs. At the front desk, a stack of new brochures had been placed neatly beside the guest register. Freshly printed. Fairhaven Courthouse Historical Tours, opening spring. There was a list of names for the volunteer staff. Mine was at the bottom. No one had asked. I didn't show up the next night, didn't call, didn't send an excuse. I just stayed home, sitting in a chair near the front window with the lights off, watching the empty street and trying not to look at the hall behind me. The silence inside my apartment felt too deep now. Like the courthouse had soaked into my ears and left a film over everything that came after. The night after that, I went in, parked outside, sat in the car for almost 40 minutes. The courthouse stood there under the street lamp glow, windows blank, entrance still marked by rust and creeping ivy. The air smelled like rain, but the pavement was bone dry. I walked to the door, badge clipped on, keys in my hand, stopped, then turned around. I didn't even clock in, didn't grab the mop, didn't unlock the closet, just got in the car and drove. That was the last time I stepped inside. I broke contract, left without a word. No one followed up, no angry phone calls, no notice of dismissal, no warnings or final checks, like I'd never worked there at all. I half expected the city to claw back my final paycheck. They didn't. The badge disappeared from my kitchen counter a few days later. I hadn't moved it. The next time I passed through town was by accident. A long detour off the main highway, nothing intentional. I needed gas, pulled off at the Fairhaven exit. Didn't realize where I was until I saw the water tower through the trees. It'd been a few months. The grass in front of the courthouse was trimmed now. Windows wiped clean. The flagpole had a fresh coat of paint. No flag yet. Looked like someone had tried to give the place a second life. But something was different. As I turned onto the street that wrapped around the building, I saw the construction van parked near the south exit. 3 workers in orange vests were standing in the basement stairwell, the wide steel door to B-12 removed entirely, propped against a dumpster like it had never held anything back. In its place, a fresh wall. They were bricking it in. Cinder block and mortar, no plaque, no seal. Just a clean closure over the hall I had walked too many nights under that one steady light that had never flickered unless it meant to. I slowed the car and watched. The men weren't talking, just working. One of them paused, wiped his hands on his vest, and looked around like he'd heard something. His gaze swept toward my car but didn't stop, just passed over me, then returned to the bricks. The light above the entrance had been replaced. No fixture. Just a blank wall now. I kept driving. Didn't stop for gas. Didn't take pictures. I got back on the highway and didn't look in the mirror until I was 20 miles out. And even then, only once. It took me a few hours to calm down after that. I drove until night, through towns I didn't know, until my hand stopped shaking on the wheel. I told myself I was fine, that it was over, that a sealed hallway meant it couldn't come back. But later that week, when I finally cleaned out the car, I found something on the rear window. Not obvious, not dramatic, just faint, a smudge angled in the lower corner of the glass, the kind you see from oily skin pressed against a clean surface, almost wiped away but not quite. Not unless you looked close, a handprint, palm broad, fingers long, too long. The mark was on the inside of the glass. I live alone. I washed it 3 times, the last time with bleach. It came back a week later, same angle, same size, just a little closer to the headrest. I don't drive at night anymore. I don't sleep without the lights on. I keep the windows cracked open just slightly to remind myself the air in here still moves. Sometimes I think I left too late. Sometimes I think I didn't leave at all. I never answered the invitation, but I think the door doesn't need to be open anymore.